Hi, this is Mike Markey, and on behalf of the Theater Arts Guild, I want to welcome you to the first interview of the Theater Arts Guild Legacy Project, an opportunity to talk to some of the folks who have been part of the Omaha theater scene over the years and the impact that they made in the Omaha theater. Today we'll be talking with Dick Mueller of the Firehouse Dinner Theater. Good morning, Dick Mueller.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, let's get the details out of the way. You're an Omaha boy, born here in Omaha.
Born in Columbus.
Columbus. Came to Omaha very early.
As a babe in arms.
There you go. Yeah. Central High School, sang in the choir. Then you got into theater after high school, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Then you toured professionally with a singing quartet and New York City and all that. Came back to Omaha, started the theater. Did some theater here first. Then you started the Firehouse Dinner Theater. Ruled the roost with the Firehouse Dinner Theater for a number of years. The number one tourist attraction in Omaha for 18 years running.
Was it that long?
It
Wow.
was. It was. 8 shows a week and all sorts of wonderful
52
things.
weeks a year.
52 weeks a year. The wine cellar, I want to talk to you about that downstairs and a special place that was. And I want to talk to you about how the Firehouse ran and who was involved in that and how you put that all together. And talk about the other theaters that you did here in town and some of the special people that you worked with, Roger Norton, Josh Logan, some of those folks. And we'll see where it goes. And the night that the TAG, Theater Arts Guild, was born. We'll talk about that a little bit.
The afternoon.
Yeah. So, start off with, what brought you to the theater?
What brought me to theater?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hadn't done any theater. I was in the back row of some show because we were in the choir, and Swanee was the theater director at Central, and I was singing in the back row of Pinafore or something like that. That was my theater experience in high school. When the quartet was up in New York recording, I had an evening or an afternoon or what free, and I was in the theater district. And I saw a marquee, and I recognized the show, and I'd never really seen a piece of theater, a real piece of theater, and I bought a standing room only ticket. This is one of those now moments, and for me, and I stood in the back for 3 hours and watched the original production of My Fair Lady, and up to that point, I thought the nightclub stage was the ultimate expression for entertainment. And when I walked out of the theater, I realized that maybe there was something beyond the nightclub stage. And it really changed my life, those 3 hours. I had never experienced theater, and that was a great first experience. Few people probably have that kind of a first experience because, let's face it, you got to watch a lot of theater normally before something really hits you. And that one was my first, and it really hit me. And that's what got me thinking about theater. Actually, I got cast, the Playhouse cast me in something as some role in the Pajama Game. And I dropped out of it very quickly because I thought I was going to do something else. So that was a no-go. And then I did West Side Story at Chanticleer. I played Tony, and that was my first real theater experience. I had made a trip out to Denver, and I'd seen a dinner theater operation out there called the Country Dinner Playhouse. And I was quite taken by that. And that kind of gave me the idea to come back to Omaha and see if I could open a similar spot here. So that's what brought me back.
And so learning all the time from those other people and how they were running things and sort of picking stuff up as you went along.
I suppose, yeah. You can't live a day without trying to learn.
In other words, you didn't go get a degree in theater management or anything like that.
No.
You learned on the spot and what you could pick up. And so you came back and you started to talk about how it was that the Firehouse Dinner Theater came to be then.
Well, it took a while to raise a few bucks to talk some nice people into helping me get it open. Actually, we opened the Firehouse, and we were doing close to $2 million a year gross. And I opened that place. I was able to raise $37,000. And it was a little thin. We opened, Actually, we spent a little more than that, but we had some bills. But fortunately, from the get-go, the place was a boffo success, and it just took off. And it grew, and when we opened, we didn't even have a kitchen. Hap Abraham, who was going on to great success, was our caterer, and he served the dinners. And we served a great dinner and a show, plus people will remember the Brigade, the pre-show. And I ran across some of our prices. When we opened, the matinee performance, I think, was $5.75.
Not for show and dinner.
Yes.
Matinee, but lunch.
Yeah, the top price probably was $8 Saturday night.
You're really sticking it to them.
Yeah, we stuck it to them. I've been trying to look for a place in Omaha to open a theater. I briefly had a lease with John Wiebe for the theater under the Westroads that he had built. And I raised enough money to do that, and I just decided I didn't like the location. I just didn't feel comfortable there. So I gave the money back that I'd raised, and I gave John back the lease, and we parted good friends. And then I looked at there was a wonderful room in the old Union Depot. And I worked out a lease with the Union Pacific, which owned the building. And I could never get them to to culminate the lease process. And of course, I realized after the fact that they had no intention because they were trying to get rid of the building. Yeah. And it ultimately became a wonderful museum. But that would have made an interesting location. I was going to call it the Iron Horse. And I was going to call the pre-show, instead of the Firehouse Brigade, it would have been called the Gandy Dancers, which is the Gandy Dancers. It's people that work on the railroad, on the lines. It would have worked fine. It would have been great, but it didn't work. And then ultimately, right around the corner from where I was sitting every day, is this old, dilapidated, empty. No, it was filled with exhaust pipes at that time because it was a warehouse for a company that sold exhaust pipes. And I went over there and looked at it and sat in that, looked at that building. And I thought, well, it might work. And ultimately, we bought that building, and I think we paid a whopping price of $30,000 for the building. And maybe it was thereabouts. And we set about building the place. Wayne Madison, who actually was, people will remember Wayne. He was in, talk about how things progress. Wayne was in, he did a lot of theater around town. But he was our first stage manager, and he and I have actually built a lot of the inside structure. Every night we'd work down there and work on the place. And I think it was May 12th or something like that, 1972, we opened. 72. And I loved Peter Citron, who used to be a critic for the World Herald. He had a wonderful line in his review of the play. Our opening show was called Butterflies Are Free. And a little play, 5-6 characters, something like that. Nothing grand, And we opened a packed house because we had a lot of people talking about us in town, and we probably had a lot of friends there. And Peter Citron wrote a line in his review of the play the next morning. He said, "The audience came to love, and they weren't disappointed."
Oh, good.
What a wonderful line. Yeah, always loved Pete for that.
Peter Citron. Yeah. And we may be bearing the lead here. Obviously, the Firehouse Dinner Theater used to be an actual firehouse.
Yes, it was. Built in 1903.
1903.
Yeah. That was the main firehouse in Omaha.
Remind us what an evening at the Firehouse was, how it started, what all you got to do, and some of the fun that happened.
Well, it was a dinner theater. And so when you came, you'd get there. People used to dress up. Ladies would come in long dresses and men in their suits. And come down there, and they'd show up on a Tuesday night. We ran from Tuesday through Sunday. Can you imagine in today's world showing up in the old market, dressed up, ready to go for a 4 or 5 hour night?
It's different times.
Different times, yeah. But they would come and they would have dinner. It was a buffet operation when we started. That would take, whatever length. And the waiters would...
Did you always have the puff pastries when you sat down?
I don't remember.
I remember that was one of the joys of going there was you sat down and before anything ever started, there was a puff pastry sitting right there.
It was a great idea. If we didn't do it, I'm sure we should have.
It was great. At any rate.
Yeah. So after dinner, the tables were cleared off and the waiters who have been waiting, serving drinks, actually you got your own dinner and got to the table. The waiters then they were called the Firehouse Brigade, and they would put on a 15-minute show. Mm-hmm. And it was specially produced. My wife, Mary Jane at the time, produced that show, and it was very popular. And it was a great operation for a bunch of kids that come in. And they made good money because the tips were wonderful.
A lot of special people went through the brigade.
Yeah,
remember some of the names?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, the K-Laws, who are still around town and doing great stuff. Yeah, I mean, you put me on the spot, but the original ones were very special. And a lot of great people went through the brigade. Then after the brigade was done, sometimes I would do a number with the brigade not always, but sometimes I would do a number with the brigade. And after the brigade, following right on was the show would start. And either 1, 2, or you don't like 3-act shows anymore, but there were sometimes we did 3-act shows.
And what was the usual fare? What sort of plays did you usually do, or was there a usual?
Well, as I said, we opened with Butterflies Are Free. Mostly we did plays, but we started doing musicals as well. They were popular. We did some big musicals. We did a couple world premieres, as a matter of fact, on that stage. First time anywhere ever. The first one we did was Red Dog, which became a huge success for us. Probably, I think we did Red Dog 4 or 5 times in our lifespan.
Space. And of course you had that beautiful lobby where you came in, you had the box office and the spiral staircase that went up to the offices. Yeah. It was a gorgeous lobby.
Oh, thank you.
It was a very special building to go into, and then obviously the plays were very popular as well.
Well,
my favorite was Death Trap. Had a beautiful Steve Wilden set, and of course
David Landis and and I think Melanie
and Barbie,
yeah.
Barbie Davis.
Yeah. It was a fun show.
David Landis, former state senator.
Yeah. We had a good time. Glad you liked it. Thank you.
I was enthralled by it.
There was a wonderful moment in that show. I always look forward to it. If you're not familiar with it, it's a murder mystery, and there's 2 writers. But the older guy, me, is out to kill the younger guy, David Landis. And it was staged. We were a 3/4 stage, so the audience was very close to us. And David was downright for some. I remember we had a garrote. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was a phony garrote, obviously. It wasn't a wire. It was a thin tube, and the handles of the garrotes were filled with blood. And I wrapped it around his throat, and as if to cut off his neck, and then squeezed the blood. And I always loved looking past him at the audience. They just absolutely were writhing.
Which is always the fun of those 3/4 seating, because you can see the audience as well.
You know what it reminds me of? It was a nightclub stage.
Sure. A lot of dinner theaters work that way because it's an intimacy. And
somewhere in the round. I never liked the round, but I loved having the set. I loved having that environment, but I liked being close to the audience.
Let's jump back here. You mentioned a couple of world premieres. Talk about that a little bit and how that happened.
How that happened?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, this goes back to those now moments in my mind. Look, you don't know things are happening when you're living in the moment, but when the luxury of looking back, you see how the threads of things connect.
Right.
And I mentioned to you, I don't know if we did it on camera or not, but the now moment concept.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I worked with a guy in New York. I studied with him, and David Craig was his name. And he used to talk about there's only one thing valuable about theater, and that is the word now. And what does that mean? He said, every great production has to have a now moment. And his example was My Fair Lady, interestingly enough. Very briefly, Eliza has just exited from the stage in a huff, leaving Henry Higgins there with his mother. She's gone from his life. And Higgins, what does he care about that? The next scene, this is on Broadway, that scene disappears, and the drop comes in with a picture of his front door painted on the drop. And he enters from the wings, and he comes to the center stage and puts his key with his back to the audience, puts his key in the flat, with the drop, with a picture on it. And he stops with his back to the audience, and he says, "Damn, damn, damn." And David Craig is telling the story because he was there at one of the first performances when the show first opened. And Rex Harrison turns around facing the audience, and he's biting his knuckle, and it's bleeding. I don't know if he did that every night, but wow. That was the now moment. And why is it a now moment? Because Henry Higgins, the character, and the audience realize at the same moment that he loves Eliza.
It's a life-changing revelation.
Yeah, that's what makes theater valuable, and that's why we keep going back, is searching for the next now moment.
I was going to ask, so you search for those moments, or you recognize when they come along and embrace them?
If you're lucky. To me, I always tell people, and I tell myself, to try to be aware of the potential of the moment. This moment, right now. What might this lead to?
Oh.
Who knows? We don't know.
I'm learning lots of stuff, I know that.
Well, be careful who teaches you. For some reason, I was in New York, and I went to this agent's office. I have no idea why I was there. But the agent wasn't in, so I'm waiting for him in this empty waiting room. And it's a one-man office. And behind the desk, the receptionist desk, is a guy. The receptionist, I'm assuming. But it turns out he wasn't the receptionist. He was somebody else. And I struck up this conversation with him. And I guess I must have, at some point in the conversation, talked about this. I was interested in doing a production of I Do, I Do. And I had seen this show in Kansas City that I just loved, and blah, blah, blah. And the receptionist says to me, "Well, I directed that show."
Is that right? Huh.
New York City. How many agents' offices?
No kidding.
And I'm sitting, you know that in today's world, my fear about today's world is that if I was sitting there in that office, rather than have that conversation with the receptionist, I'd probably been on my cell phone.
Yeah.
Never have had that conversation.
Yeah.
Turns out that was Leland Ball sitting there, and he said, "I directed that show." Oh my goodness. That's a now moment.
No kidding.
So I said, let's do it no more. Okay, so the show's down, it's open, Leland's work is done, and he's got to catch a midnight airplane, or 1 o'clock in the morning airplane. And he and I are, let's say our wits' end is behind us now, because we've had a lot of struggles to get this thing up. And I'm taking him to the airport, and all the way out to the airport, we don't talk much. It's brittle. It was a tough week. And back then you used to walk down these long corridors and I'm walking him to the gate. What a gentleman I was. But we're not talking. And for some reason, this was another moment, a now moment. I stopped walking, and Leland stopped walking, and I said, don't catch this airplane. He said, okay. We turned around and walked back, went to my house. We sat up the night talking. Ultimately became the best of friends. And he came back and directed many things. And back to your question, how did Red Dog start? Well, Red Dog was the creation of Leland Ball and Arthur B. Rubinstein, the composer. And they had this little play. And we ended up doing the world premiere of Red Dog. And it went on to be our biggest success as far as the box office is concerned in 20 years.
Talk a little bit about how you chose the seasons.
Well, I used to drive the people around me crazy because they wanted to know, especially the group sales people. They needed to know what they were going to sell people 2, 3, 4, or 5 months from now. And that was always really hard for me. Looking back on it, I just realized what a great job they did. But even I drove them crazy because I was so reluctant to book way ahead because I just needed to stay. See, we wouldn't have been able to do a lot of those things if we hadn't been able to do them right now. Pick up the phone and call. So I tried to plan ahead, but my nature was such that I always wanted to be free to scratch what we were planning to do for something that I thought would be more exciting for the moment. I wouldn't recommend that as a way of living. It leads to weeks like that week I had with Leland and I had with I Do. But the upside is that there's a certain excitement about living on that edge and being able to turn on a dime and do something different that compensated for the pain and suffering.
Okay, so all good things have to come to an end.
Nothing lasts forever.
No kidding. And it's part of a larger discussion of dinner theaters in general, but talk a little bit about how the golden years of the Firehouse ended, how the Firehouse went away, and then we'll ask you a little bit about dinner theaters in general, but talk a little bit about the Firehouses.
Well, the Firehouse, we opened in 72, and I left there in 90. 18 years. 15 of the greatest years of my life.
I'm doing the math. That's 3 years.
Unfortunately, I ran at 18 years.
Yes.
And nothing lasts forever. Pat, my wife, ran across some statistics in an equity publication recently. At one point, there were, don't hold me to these numbers, but there was something like 150 professional equity actor dinner theaters in the United States. At one time, we had 3 of them here in Omaha. So we were probably overquoted for our size. But and today there's, I'm guessing, I'd be surprised if there's more than 12.
Yep.
So what happened to dinner theater? The audience went away. Life has really changed. Back to our original talk, I mean, how many ladies and gentlemen are going to show up dressed at 5:30 in the afternoon in downtown Omaha to spend 4 hours or 4.5 hours in a theater watching, having dinner and watching a play? It just, unfortunately, in my mind, life was better for people in the 70s because they had time. People today, they don't have time to even consider thinking about spending that kind of, especially Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The seats had to be filled, so people had to come 8 times a week.
I don't want to let you go without asking you a little bit about how the Theater Arts Guild started. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that.
How your organization started?
That Theater Arts Guild, that's right.
Well, community theater was very active. There were a lot of community theaters in Omaha at one time. Chanticleer, the Playhouse, of course, Kingsmark. There were a number of them. And there was quite a wealth of a pool of talent here. Rudyard Norton, Bill Bailey, you name it. There were a lot of good, talented people. And at some point, I don't know how much I had to do it. I've never been a union person, but it always sort of seemed strange to me that everybody at the Playhouse, for instance, got paid except the actors. Mm-hmm. And I believed, and still believe, and always will believe, that people should be compensated for their talents. So, I'm not sure how much I was the instigator of it. There were a number. But we had a meeting one afternoon in my apartment at the Aquila Court. Wonderful, beautiful room, big room. And that meeting was to talk about forming an organization of, we didn't want to call it a union, but our desire was an organization that would try to lead to a more professional atmosphere for actors. And obviously you can see our prejudice because we named it MAG, the Metropolitan Actors Guild. Yeah. Which somebody wisely later on decided to change to TAG, the Theater Arts Guild, because why not? Because it's a communal effort. But that was the beginning of MAG, which I guess is your parentage from TAG.
Remember some of the people there?
Yes, vividly. Of course. The most vivid was Rudyard, my dear, dear friend, who was in the first production that I ever did and slapped me silly in West Side Story. He played Doc. He stood up at the fireplace in my apartment. Now, mind you, our purpose is to try to work toward, I guess, compensation for actors. And dear Rudyard, my dear friend, he stands up in the middle of this meeting and he gives a impassioned plea, wonderful speech about how he didn't think actors should be paid. The button to that story is years later, Rudyard told me that he was wrong because he had since I'd hired him and paid him, and he had gone to Chanhassen and been paid to do a show, and he found that he liked being compensated for his talents.
Well, I'm fascinated. He didn't think they should be paid.
No,
how would they make a living?
Oh, well, that was community theater. That was the ethos.
Okay.
The ethos of community theater is you do it for the love of it.
The amateur.
Yeah, the amateur theater. Yeah. And it's still...
Amateur in the pure sense of the form.
Yes.
For the love of.
That's not a quality thing. That's because Rudyard could have been on any stage with anybody.
Right.
It's not a matter of quality. It's a matter of, matter of uncompensated, unpaid for.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's...
but he had a revelation.
It took him a number of years, but the Filberts were there, of course, and Orville Milder, I'm sure, was there. I mean, the room was filled. There must have been 20 or 30 of us in the room. And like I say, we were not successful, and ultimately, I guess I was, because I started professional theater in town. But MAG I'm pleased to see it's still going as an organization.
And you gave awards even back then.
Yes, we did. We created what we called a Maggie. I don't know where we must have had at least handed out a dozen of those.
You remember where the award ceremony was?
No.
Was it a dinner or just?
Don't know. Can't remember that.
Somebody said, "Here, Dick, you won."
I don't know. We must have had some kind of a celebration, but...
Well, that's wonderful. I appreciate very much you bringing it and sharing it with us. And for sharing all of your wonderful stories.
I haven't bored you too much.
No, this is all fascinating.
It's fun to relive it.
My guess is we could probably talk another 5 or 6 hours, but we'll call it a day, and I will thank you very much for sharing everything. And my guest today has been Dick Mueller of the Firehouse Dinner Theater. I want to thank him for spending some time and sharing some stories with us. I want to thank the Nebraska Arts Council for allowing us to video down here in their art gallery. I want to thank Ryan LaHood for doing the videography for us. I want to thank Susan Tracy and Jody Vaccaro for putting this thing together. I want to thank you all for watching.